The room froze. Every eye locked on Barack Obama, waiting to see if he would falter under Trump's words. Cameras flashed like lightning, desperate to capture the exact second history might tilt. A silence thicker than steel spread across the hall, broken only by the rasp of Trump's voice, sharp, mocking, designed to cut. "You've had your time, Barack. Nobody wants to hear from you anymore. Sit down." The words landed with the weight of a gavel, final and arrogant. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Some mouths hung open, others turned away in disbelief. A few in the front rows nodded, eager for Trump's spectacle, but the rest of the room seemed suspended between outrage and shock. The moderator's eyes darted nervously between the two men, hands tightening on her notes as though paper could anchor the moment. Reporters at the back typed furiously, their fingers trembling on keyboards. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer, waiting. Trump smirked, satisfied, convinced his interruption had stolen the spotlight. His shoulders leaned forward, lips curled in that familiar sneer. The performance of dominance he had mastered over decades. The villain at center stage, confident. The crowd was his to command. And yet opposite him, Barack Obama did not move. He did not blink. He stood tall, still, composed, the quiet in his posture louder than any microphone could project. His eyes scanned the room as though he was not looking at Trump at all, but at the millions of Americans beyond these walls who knew this dance all too well. The bully, the arrogance, the attempt to silence. The crowd seemed to breathe with him, inhaling his calm, waiting for the reply that hadn't yet come. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the entire nation leaned forward at once. Trump broke the silence again, louder this time, voice booming. "Go on, say something, or are you finished?" But Obama still didn't speak. His pause became a weapon, his stillness a mirror reflecting the insecurity behind Trump's bluster. Each second stretched, the tension winding tighter, drawing every person in that room deeper into the unfolding drama. And then, but no one could have predicted the calm, devastating response that was about to follow. Trump's words didn't just hang in the air, they ignited a firestorm of tension that stretched far beyond the walls of that room. To understand why this single attempt to silence Obama mattered so profoundly, one had to step back and see the stakes already simmering in America. For years, Trump had crafted his image as the unchallenged voice of defiance, the man who bulldozed his way through norms, conversations, and opponents. He thrived on control, on breaking into another's sentence and flooding the space with his own. His interruptions weren't mistakes, they were strategy. To silence Obama, though, was to silence the very symbol of dignity that millions of Americans still clung to. This wasn't just another clash of egos, it was a reflection of America's deeper fracture. Trump represented the roar of division, the sneer of dominance. Obama embodied something else, patience, hope, the reminder that voices like his were not simply personal, but generational. For immigrant families watching from their living rooms, the moment hit with a sting. They had heard words like "sit down" before. They had seen doors closed, opportunities cut short, dignity pushed aside. In homes across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Some were outraged, firing off tweets within seconds. Trump is trying to erase Obama in real time. We can't let him. Others clenched their fists, muttering under their breath, "Not again, not to him." Hashtags began to swirl, gaining traction even before Obama had uttered a word. The moderator shifted uneasily, sensing the clash was no longer confined to her stage, but was unfolding in millions of living rooms, cafes, and phones buzzing with alerts. A silencing attempt against Obama was more than theatrics. It was a symbolic act, daring the country to decide what kind of voices deserved to be heard. For Trump, the stakes were control. For Obama, the stakes were something higher. Whether dignity could withstand the storm of arrogance, whether truth could still rise in an age when volume often replaced reason. The audience in the room could feel it. Some whispered nervously. Others tried to stifle applause in anticipation. It was as if every heartbeat pounded out the same question. Would Obama let the insult pass, or would he rise to meet it? The tension tightened further as Trump leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smug grin spreading across his face. He believed he had already won the moment, but his grin betrayed a miscalculation. What Trump saw as victory, millions saw as bullying. What he called dominance, many saw as desperation. The stakes had risen beyond politics. This wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about who gets to speak, who gets to belong, and whether arrogance could truly drown out dignity. And as Obama finally lifted his gaze and prepared to answer, every camera tightened its frame, every phone lit up with anticipation, and every viewer at home held their breath. Because what happened next would not just change the energy of that room, it would change everything. To understand why Trump's words carried such venom, one had to see the man behind them, the antagonist who had built an empire not only of wealth, but of noise, spectacle, and calculated humiliation. His rise was never about quiet persuasion. It was about drowning out every other voice until his alone remained. Long before this clash with Obama, Trump had mastered the art of interruption. On television, in boardrooms, and eventually on debate stages, he wielded volume like a hammer. Critics, rivals, even allies. None were spared from his verbal bulldozing. He branded opponents with mocking nicknames, sliced them down mid-sentence, and relished in the roar of the crowd that followed. For Trump, dominance was the end game. If he could silence you, he could erase you. And yet, beneath the swagger lay an insecurity that demanded constant performance. He had built towers with his name etched in gold, but he also built walls around his ego, around his power. Every challenge threatened to expose cracks in the facade. That's why silencing Obama mattered so much to him. Obama wasn't just another political rival. He was the embodiment of everything Trump struggled against: composure, intellect, global respect, and a story rooted not in privilege but perseverance. Trump's backstory reads like a manual on the pursuit of control. Born into wealth, he learned early that money could buy silence, that lawyers and contracts could muzzle dissent. He carried that lesson into the public stage, where insults became currency and intimidation became policy. From press conferences where he shouted down reporters, to campaign rallies where he egged on chants against opponents, Trump cultivated an image of a man who could shut anyone up. But his methods carried contradictions. For every cheer that his bravado earned, there was a backlash waiting just around the corner. He mocked a disabled reporter, and outrage flared. He shouted over female rivals, and millions of women recognized their own experiences in his dismissiveness. He claimed to be the voice of the people, but often worked hardest to silence those very voices. In that sense, Trump's attempt to cut down Obama wasn't new. It was a continuation of the strategy that had carried him from real estate mogul to reality TV star to president, the belief that loudness equals strength. Yet, here, standing across from him, was the one man who refused to play by those rules. Because Obama's strength had never been in volume, his power lay in restraint, in the calm pause that made the next words land with tenfold force. Trump thrived on chaos. Obama thrived on clarity. And that clash was about to expose Trump's greatest flaw. The louder he tried to shout, the smaller he seemed in comparison to dignity. For the audience watching, Trump's history was impossible to ignore. They had seen him call immigrants criminals, question the legitimacy of judges, even attempt to strip away the credibility of an election itself. Every attempt to silence wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about erasing the other side of America's story. The side that believed in inclusion, in fairness, in voices that didn't come wrapped in wealth and entitlement. In the hall, Trump leaned forward again, the same tactics on display: belittle, dominate, overwhelm. It was the familiar script of his rise replayed once more. But this time, the stage wasn't tilted in his favor. Because this time, his opponent's silence was louder than his roar. And deep down, perhaps Trump sensed it. Perhaps that was why his jabs came faster, harsher, dripping with the desperation of a man trying to hold on to control that was already slipping away. He believed he was delivering the final blow, the line that would silence Obama into irrelevance. But every villain's story is only half the tale. Because across that battlefield stood a man with an entirely different journey. Barack Obama's story began far from the marble halls of power, far from the spotlight of cameras flashing in his face. His journey was stitched together by humility, sacrifice, and the quiet resilience of a boy raised to believe that dignity was not something granted by the powerful, but something carried within. Born to a Kenyan father and a Kansas mother, Obama grew up in spaces where identity was often questioned, where belonging was not guaranteed. He knew what it meant to feel like the outsider, to navigate the world with people doubting not just his abilities, but his very right to be present. That struggle shaped him. It taught him the value of listening before speaking, of carrying himself with calm even in the face of chaos. In Hawaii and later in the neighborhoods of Chicago, Obama learned that true leadership was not about the loudest voice in the room. It was about the voice that could unite a fractured one. He worked as a community organizer, walking streets many politicians ignored, listening to families who felt silenced by the system. These weren't photo opportunities. They were lessons that the fight for respect was always bigger than one person, and always worth enduring with patience. When he entered politics, he carried those lessons with him. He spoke not in roars, but in cadences that lifted rather than crushed. His speeches carried hope because they were rooted in lived experience. Every time he stood at a podium, millions saw not just a politician but a reflection of their own struggles. Immigrants who had been told to sit down, workers who had been overlooked, students who had been underestimated. And then, in 2008, he shattered what many thought impossible. A young black man with a name unfamiliar to most households rose to the presidency of the United States. The victory wasn't his alone. It was a victory for every person who had been told they didn't belong. For every family who had crossed oceans for opportunity. For every child who grew up doubting if they were enough. But even as president, Obama faced the relentless noise of detractors. He was interrupted in speeches, mocked for his heritage, challenged for his birthplace, attacked for his calm demeanor. Through it all, he rarely raised his voice. He let his silence work for him, his words chosen with precision, his presence a reminder that dignity could withstand even the fiercest storms. That resilience became part of his identity. He wasn't simply a politician. He was a symbol of the America that believed patience could outlast prejudice, that hope could stand firm against hate. And this is why Trump's attempt to silence him struck so deeply. For many watching, it wasn't just about two men on a stage. It was about two Americas clashing. One built on arrogance, entitlement, and the need to dominate. The other built on restraint, perseverance, and the unshakable belief that every voice deserved space. Obama's story gave him a different kind of armor. He had endured too much to crumble under an insult. He had walked through doubt, racism, and attempts to delegitimize his very citizenship. What was one more attempt to shut him down compared to the weight of all those who had tried and failed before? He knew that millions were watching, not just to see what he would say, but to see if he would falter, to see if dignity could still hold its ground in a world where arrogance seemed to dominate the headlines. So he stood still, composed, his silence echoing louder than Trump's words. His very posture told the story of a man who had been underestimated his entire life, yet never stopped rising. And it was this history, this quiet resilience, that armed Obama for the moment when Trump tried to silence him. The tension in the room thickened like fog, heavy and unshakable. Trump leaned forward, his words firing like darts, each one sharper than the last. He wasn't finished. He never was. Every sentence was an attempt to cut deeper, to smother the moment with sheer noise. "You've talked enough," Trump barked, his voice booming across the hall. "You had your 8 years and look where that got us. Weak, divided, laughed at. Nobody needs to hear your lectures anymore." The crowd stirred. Some of his supporters clapped with force, eager to punctuate his words, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The moderator raised a hand, trying to regain order, but Trump overrode her, speaking louder, faster, determined to dominate the stage. Obama remained still. His expression didn't flinch, his eyes calm, almost distant, as though he were observing the storm rather than standing inside it. For every interruption, he simply waited. For every jab, he absorbed the silence. His restraint only fueled the suspense. Trump grew bolder with each unanswered remark. He cut into the air with his hands, pacing his insults with the cadence of a man certain he was winning. "Tell us, Barack, what great legacy did you leave? Jobs shipped overseas, enemies laughing at us, a healthcare system collapsing. You call that leadership? You should be thanking me for cleaning up your mess." The words fell like hammers, but the room was no longer leaning toward Trump. Slowly, imperceptibly, the balance began to shift. The audience's eyes turned back to Obama, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to prove that silence was not weakness, but patience sharpening into power. Cameras zoomed closer, desperate to capture the exact moment he would break his stillness. Reporters at the back whispered to each other, their keyboards ready, knowing history was hovering in the pause. The tension became unbearable, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, that made every heartbeat echo louder. Trump, sensing his grip slipping, lashed out again. "Come on, Barack, where's that silver tongue of yours, or is it gone? Afraid you can't handle the truth standing right in front of you?" His smirk widened, convinced he had backed his rival into a corner. But he didn't see what the rest of the room already sensed, that the silence wasn't surrender. It was the coiling of a spring. The longer Obama waited, the heavier his reply would fall. The air seemed to vibrate as the moment drew near. Even those who disagreed with Obama leaned forward, unwilling to miss the spectacle. Trump's insults had raised the stakes so high that only something extraordinary could resolve the tension. And then, as the moderator's voice cracked while attempting to intervene, Obama finally shifted, just slightly. A glance, a movement so subtle it sent a ripple across the stage. He raised his head, his eyes locking onto Trump's with the calm intensity of a man who had weathered storms far greater than this. The room stilled again. Phones hovered mid-air. Fingers froze above keyboards. And then, with just a pause and a glance, Obama shifted the entire energy of the room. Obama's lips parted slowly, his breath deliberate, his tone measured. When he finally spoke, his words cut through the silence like a blade through glass. "Donald," he began, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I've been told to sit down my entire life, by people louder than you, by people with more money than you, by people who thought they could silence me just because they couldn't understand me. And yet, here I am." The room reacted in waves, first a murmur, then a collective gasp, the sound of tension releasing into awe. Trump's smirk twitched, his jaw tightening ever so slightly, as though he hadn't expected his opponent to step so effortlessly into the storm. Obama didn't rush. His words landed with pauses that demanded attention. He knew that silence was his weapon, that each beat of stillness amplified the power of what followed. "You say nobody wants to hear from me?" he continued, his eyes sweeping the audience. "But look around. People are here. People are listening. Not because I'm loud, not because I shout, but because they know, deep down, that truth doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard." The audience erupted in applause, a swell that rolled through the hall like thunder. Some stood to their feet, clapping with the kind of urgency that belonged to history, while others leaned back, stunned, into silence. Trump tried to interject, "That's not..." But his words drowned beneath the applause. The microphone may have caught his protest, but the crowd had already chosen who they were listening to. Obama lifted a hand, not to silence the room, but to let the applause fade naturally. His command wasn't in force, it was in presence. When the hall finally settled, he leaned forward, his voice firm, steady, impossible to look away from. "You can try to silence me, Donald. But what? You really want to silence as an idea? The idea that someone who doesn't look like you, or sound like you, or come from where you came from, can still stand here as an equal, or maybe even more." A wave of cheers exploded, this time stronger, a standing ovation bursting from the left side of the hall and spreading like wildfire. Trump shifted uneasily. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered not by aggression, but by composure. His interruptions suddenly felt small, childish even. in contrast to the gravity of Obama's words. "And here's the truth," Obama added, voice now rising just slightly, not shouting but resonating with conviction. "You don't silence people because they're wrong. You silence them because you're afraid they might be right." That line detonated. The crowd roared, stomping feet, clapping hands, the sound ricocheting off the walls until it felt like the entire building shook. Phones shot into the air, recording, live streaming, tweets already forming in real time. You don't silence people because they're wrong. You silence them because you're afraid they might be right. Obama allowed the eruption to play out, then delivered the final strike with precision. "So go ahead, tell me to sit down, tell me to be quiet, but understand this. Every time you try, it only proves why I must keep standing, and why millions of others will stand with me. Because dignity doesn't bow to arrogance. Not today, not ever." The hall exploded in applause, louder than anything that had come before. It wasn't just clapping, it was a release, a catharsis, the sound of a collective spirit finding its voice through his. People were on their feet, some with tears in their eyes, some with fists in the air, others recording with shaking hands as if to prove to the future that they had witnessed this exact moment. Trump's face hardened. He reached for the microphone, eager to reclaim control, but even his voice couldn't cut through the tidal wave of approval swelling for his rival. His trademark dominance, his sneering interruptions, none of it mattered now. He was losing the room, and everyone could feel it. Obama, however, didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply stood in the center of the storm he had created, calm, grounded, letting the moment speak louder than he ever could. His final words lingered, not as an attack, but as a truth too undeniable to ignore. The cameras zoomed in, capturing Trump's clenched jaw, Obama's steady eyes, and the sea of faces electrified by what they had just witnessed. It was the mic drop moment, the reply that would replay on televisions, phones, and feeds for weeks to come. The counterattack so calm, so devastating, that it transformed the confrontation from a mere clash of egos into a moral turning point. And yet, the true shock wasn't contained in that hall alone. Because outside those walls, across America, the ripple effects were only just beginning. The moment Obama's final words settled into silence, the explosion began. Not just in the hall, but across the entire country. Phones lit up instantly, notifications piling in like a digital avalanche. Clips of his counterattack were already flooding Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. Within minutes, hashtags trended worldwide. Dignity wins, Obama mic drop, silence broken. On Twitter, one user wrote, "You don't silence people because they're wrong. You silence them because you're afraid they might be right." This is the line of the decade. It was retweeted hundreds of thousands of times in an hour. Another clip, Obama's calm, steady gaze locking onto Trump just before delivering his strike, spread like wildfire on TikTok, set to dramatic music and amassing millions of views before the debate even ended. Newsrooms scrambled to keep up. Anchors interrupted scheduled coverage, cutting straight to live analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, we may have just witnessed one of the most powerful exchanges in modern political history, one commentator announced, visibly stunned. CNN replayed the clip on loop. Fox tried to spin the moment as staged, but even their analysts admitted grudgingly that the reply had landed with surgical precision. In cafes, college dorms, and living rooms, the reaction was visceral. Families pointed at their screens, children asked parents what Obama meant, and grandparents nodded knowingly, recognizing the age-old story of arrogance humbled by restraint. Across immigrant households, the words hit especially deep. Many had heard the command, "sit down," in classrooms, workplaces, or airports. To watch Obama flip that humiliation into strength was not just inspiring, it was personal. Celebrities joined in, amplifying the ripple effect. Musicians quoted his line in Instagram stories. Actors posted videos of themselves clapping at their TVs. Late-night hosts couldn't resist. Obama just gave a masterclass in how to silence a man who's built his entire career on shouting. Even politicians across the aisle couldn't ignore it. Some Republicans distanced themselves from Trump's behavior, calling the exchange unbecoming. Democrats, meanwhile, seized the opportunity to rally supporters, framing Obama's words as a reminder that dignity still had a place in American discourse. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from everyday people. A video of a young Latina student, tears in her eyes, went viral as she explained why the moment mattered to her. "All my life I've been told to sit down, to stay quiet, to not take up space." Hearing him say that dignity doesn't bow to arrogance, it felt like he was speaking for me. Her post was shared millions of times, layered with comments from people echoing her sentiment. For me too. For all of us. Meanwhile, in the debate hall, the atmosphere had shifted permanently. The once splintered audience now leaned overwhelmingly toward Obama. Trump's attempts to speak again were drowned out by murmurs, some outright boos, as if the crowd had collectively decided they had seen enough. His dominance, the weapon he relied on most, had been stripped away, leaving only the raw discomfort of a man whose tactics had finally failed. Journalists who had once written of Trump's commanding stage presence now drafted headlines of his unraveling. The Washington Post prepared a piece titled, "The Moment Silence Spoke Louder Than Shouting." The New York Times ran with, "Obama's words reverberate across America." The ripple extended even further. International media picked up the story. British commentators called it a modern statesman's takedown. European papers drew parallels to classic debates where wit overcame bluster. In Kenya, headlines framed it as the son of their soil standing tall on the global stage once again. What began as a silencing attempt had transformed into a shockwave of validation, inspiration, and unity. Obama's calm defiance wasn't just remembered, it was immortalized. His words were printed on T-shirts within days, quoted in classrooms, and turned into viral memes pairing Trump's scowl with Obama's line. And yet, even amid the celebration, a deeper question began to surface. Beyond the cheers, beyond the headlines, beyond the trending hashtags, what lesson did this moment truly leave behind? Because in the middle of all the noise, one clear truth was beginning to emerge. In the days that followed, the clip of Obama's reply was no longer just a moment in a debate. It became a touchstone, a symbol replayed in classrooms, churches, and family conversations across the nation. People weren't only quoting his words. They were internalizing them, applying them to their own struggles, their own battles with arrogance, dismissal, and exclusion. The moral was unmistakable. Obama had shown that dignity was not weakness, that patience was not silence, and that restraint could be the sharpest form of power. His calm dismantling of Trump's attempt to humiliate him carried a truth that resonated beyond politics. In a world addicted to volume, integrity still had the ability to rise above the noise. Teachers played the clip to students as an example of leadership. Community leaders used it in speeches to remind their neighbors that bullies thrive only when people give in to intimidation. Parents shared it with their children, whispering, "See, this is how you face someone who tries to tear you down." For immigrant families, the lesson cut even deeper. Obama's story had always been tied to theirs, but this moment crystallized it. That every time someone tells you to sit down, you have the right to stand taller. That every attempt to erase your voice only proves how powerful that voice truly is. His words became a mirror reflecting the lives of millions who had endured dismissal, and a promise that dignity would not be erased. And for America at large, the confrontation became a reminder of choice. Two models of leadership had stood on that stage. One built on arrogance, insults, and noise, and the other built on steadiness, respect, and truth. Which one would define the nation moving forward? Commentators framed it as a battle of values. It wasn't about left or right, blue or red. It was about whether the country wanted leaders who silenced or leaders who inspired. And that question lingered, echoing long after the cameras were turned off. Obama himself reframed the moment in a speech days later, addressing a crowd in his signature cadence. "We don't win by shouting down our opponents. We win by standing strong in our values. We don't move forward by silencing each other. We move forward by listening, by building, by believing in the dignity of every person." It wasn't just a reflection. It was an invitation. An invitation to see dignity as strength, not fragility. To see hope as resilience, not naivety. To see the fight for respect as the truest definition of Americanness. Because in the end, this story was never only about Trump versus Obama. It was about arrogance versus dignity, division versus unity, noise versus truth. And the resolution was clear. Dignity had not only survived, it had triumphed. But before we end, let's remember why this story still matters for you today. And so, the moment that began with an attempt to silence ended with a voice echoing across America. Trump's command for Obama to sit down was meant to humiliate, but instead, it unleashed a reply that inspired millions. It proved that arrogance may roar, but dignity endures, and dignity, when tested, always leaves the deeper mark. As the crowd rose to their feet, as social media lit up with fire, as families replayed the clip again and again, one truth became undeniable. History remembers not the loudest voice, but the one that speaks with courage, calm, and conviction. Obama didn't just answer for himself that night. He answered for every person who has ever been told they don't belong, every voice dismissed as too small to matter. And that is why this story isn't just politics, it's personal. It's about you. It's about us. It's about the America we choose to build together. So if this moment moved you, don't let it end here. Be part of the conversation. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that dignity is stronger than hate. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story, your perspective, your voice. And if you believe in amplifying stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Join us, because together, we are louder than any attempt to silence. The lesson is clear. Arrogance fades. Dignity lasts. And when history looks back, it will remember who stood tall. Because in the end, dignity doesn't bow. Not today. Not ever.